I can confirm we're now live.
Thank you, Emma. Welcome everyone tonight to tonight's Communities and Environment Overview and Scrutiny panels review into food waste implementation into flats and houses in multiple occupancy. Before we actually start and any introductions, I'd just like everyone to observe a minute's silence as a mark of respect for the passing of His Royal Highness Prince Philip. Thank you, everyone. Tonight we have the pleasure of Julia presenting to us, and Julia's kindly agreed to come tonight, and she is from the Waste and Resources Action Programme, and she is an absolute expert on food waste. I think before we start, we'll just do a quick introduction, if that's all right, Julia.
Really, yeah.
Who's about on the table. My name is John Porter. I'm chairman of the panel. I'm going to introduce you to Tina next.
Hi, Tina McKenzie-Boyle, and I'm John's vice chair. I'm Growthorne Parish and Borough Councillor.
Michael Brossard, please.
Yes, Michael Brossard, Borough Councillor for Central Sandhurst, and an advocate of food waste disposal, a passionate believer in it.
That's because he eats most of it. Tricia.
Oh gosh, yeah. Hi, I'm Councillor Tricia Brown. I'm for Priestwood and Garth, and we have both HMOs and flats in my patch. I'll be very interested to see how this pans out. Thank you.
Ian, please.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Julia. Ian Kirk, Ward Councillor from Bulbrook.
Sandra.
Hi, good evening. Sandra Ingham here, and I'm the councillor for Warfield Harvest Ride. Also, a total fan of food waste recycling.
Moira.
Hello there, I'm Maura Gore and I'm the councillor for Winkfield and Cranbourne.
Ray.
Chair, Ray Mossam. I'm councillor for Owlsmore Ward.
Mary.
Good evening, Mary Temperton. I'm councillor for Great Hollands North, and some have big blocks and blocks and blocks of flats. Thank you.
Bob.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now, Bob.
Yep.
Can you see me?
No.
No, okay.
That might be a blessing.
Yeah. Right, Councillor Bob Angel, councillor for Bulbrook Ward.
Thanks. Dot.
Councillor Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, the Ascot Ward member, and also the executive member for food waste, and it's a pleasure to be able to be invited to this. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Kirsty. Kirsty?
Oh, I think Kirsty's gone actually.
Has she? All right, she's still on my screen. Okay, Emma.
Well, I'll just introduce myself. Julie and I have spoken a couple of times, but I support the governance and scrutiny panel, so I'm a governance and scrutiny officer.
Okay, many thanks, everyone. Okay, Julia, hopefully you'll introduce yourself during your presentation. And I've heard that it's a fantastic, so no pressure.
No pressure.
So would you like questions as the slides come up or all at the end?
Let's do questions where I get to some little sort of page marker sections. So anyway.
Have you just asked for questions then when you feel you want to take any questions, yeah?
Yeah. So a few things. So if there's any burning issues, or I'm speaking too quickly, too quietly, if you want to put something in the chat, hopefully I'll be able to see that in a minute. I've got screens everywhere, which is why it looks like I'm not really looking at you. So Emma, are you going to do the next slide thing for me, Emma?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted to join you from the comfort of my study. I would have been delighted to join you in your civic centre in Bracknell Forest as well. And lovely to see so many of you, and so many of you sounding so keen. I've done a little bit of work with the E3 partnership. I know you've gone through a big change recently, rolling out food waste collections to your curbside properties. So well done to you guys and to all the officers involved in that. So I've been at WRAP now for 13 years, which feels a very long time. I've worked on a variety of projects with a number of local authorities. My special interest, sort of mastermind type topic, is contamination of dry recycling. But I've been involved in rolling out food waste collection projects to curbside properties with probably about 5 different, maybe more, 7 local authorities. So I know quite a bit, but not as much as some of my other colleagues. So I'm very flattered by Councillor Porter. Thank you. Okay, so next slide, please. Right, okay. I've got 2 slide decks going on. Let me just move this over to my other screen. Hang on a second. There's always a technical hitch, isn't there? Okay, I'm just going to have to look at my other screen. So yeah, so not my camera. So WRAP's mission is to have a world in which resources are used sustainably. So we like to talk about resources, not waste. And we aim to do that through inventing how we design, produce and sell products, rethinking how we use and consume products, and redefining what is possible through reuse and recycling. So 3 different kinds of re's for you there. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
So quick agenda. So I'm going to give you some context about recycling in general in flats, an overview of some of the options for collections, looking inside the kitchen and then outside, some key points to consider when collecting food waste from flats, looking at some of the problems and potential solutions, and some case studies looking at what success looks like for other local authorities, and then all your questions and hopefully some answers. Next slide. So next slide again. Okay, shall we see if we can try the chat function? And I'm going to ask you 2 questions, which if you can answer in the chat function, if you know how to do that, and if you don't worry too much. But if you move your mouse around, there's a little chat speech bubble thing down the bottom.
Oh, for God's sake, it's so simple, but I just didn't know how.
So it's down at the bottom. So if you can see the chat function. And I've got 2 questions for you. Basically, do any of you live in flats at the moment? Or have you lived in flats, and what have been your experiences in recycling, things like pots, tubs and trays, glass, cans, paper? So if you want to feedback some thoughts, that would be brilliant. And in the meantime, I'm just going to wonder whether it's going to be possible for Emma to click on the research video from Resource London.
Yes.
I don't know whether it will play from here, but if not, I've got another idea. It might be that we have to share a different screen.
Yeah, I'm just going to bear with me 1 second.
Technology is great when it works. Thank you, Councillor Porter. Never lived in a flat. Okay. And hopefully this little video will bring some of the issues to light for you.
Okay, let me know when you're ready for me to play it.
You can go ahead and play. Yeah. Oh, I don't think any of you can hear it, can you?
No, can you not hear?
I can't personally.
No.
No.
Maybe if I do this.
Sorry, Emma.
Sorry, Erin, I think it's at the share stage. You need to make sure you've clicked that you're sharing your audio.
It doesn't matter if we can't see it because I've got some photos that I can share with you.
So when you click share, Emma, bottom left of the window of thumbnails, there's a little box that says share sound. Just make sure that's ticked.
We have no space at all in my kitchen for recycling.
If I was to get a recycling bin, I don't know where it would go.
Our journey from the kitchen to the bins can sometimes be slightly tricky, but that's what you have two grown-up children for, to help with. It makes you not want to touch them. If the bins are dirty and not kept clean.
As much as it's a place for recycling, it's also a place where people want to go to the toilet.
This, I don't know if it belongs there, but it is there. I hope it gets recycled. That's why I did it.
I think what I'm learning from this is the environment really drives what I care about.
Thank you, Emma. That was great. So I hope that's given you a little insight into some of the issues that the partnership Resource London discovered in a project that I was involved with a couple of years ago, which focused solely on dry recycling. So we're just going to wait for the slides. And thank you all so much for these comments. It's a kind of a real mixture of some people that have lived in flats, never lived in flats, people that haven't lived in flats for a while. So so hopefully, as I work through the next few slides, I'll just give you some more context about how difficult it can be to collect recycling from flats. So next slide, please. So here we've got a site in Clerkenwell. It's sort of a Dickensian age building owned by the Peabody Trust. It's a site that I used to go and visit every week. The image on the left is the recycling bins before we did any work. And there's a little food waste bin, the brown bin, on the right-hand side. That's on the right is an image of the recycling facilities that we installed as part of the project. You'll see the food waste bin there with much better housing on it and an aperture, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a bit more detail. But hopefully you'll notice the difference. So you've got green signage there, you've got the teal sort of turquoisey blue signage on the bin store doors. That's behind, that's where the residual bins are. You've got signage on the side of the 1100 litre bins, and then an aperture on the top with a flap so that you can't put great big bags of of rubbish into the recycling. And then the lock for the bin lid is at the back of the bin, so it's very hard for people to prise open that lock. So just some sort of before and after images for you. Next slide, please. So these are other sites where I worked, and really to illustrate that even when you've spent a lot of time and money researching all the problems that people have with recycling, even when you've done that, you can see that the picture on the right hand side was 2 days after we did a whole revamp of the bin stores with lots of new signage, some emotive posters to motivate people to think about when they were putting something in the bins, could they choose to recycle things rather than put it in the residual. And that's another site where there is food waste recycling, but you can see the state of the bin store there. And to be honest, that's a pretty good day. So it's tricky. Next slide, please. Some people have to make a great deal of effort to go and find their recycling bins. So in the first image we had where we saw the blue doors of the bin store, that blue cross is where that bin store is, and the caretaker's office. The start of that red line right at the top of the image is the furthest block from any recycling facilities at all. You had to walk down a long alleyway, past a pub, down the road, down another alleyway, and into the central courtyard to find the recycling bin. They had food waste bins, but no dry recycling bins. And then the parallel green and yellow squiggles that I've put on there with the arrows, that was to find the recycling bin and the food waste bin. And people probably only had about 10 litres of space for recycling. If you looked at the number of flats in that estate, they only had 3 1100 litre bins, so just not enough space. And it was way too easy to just put everything in the residual bin. Okay, next slide, please. So just to recap on that, I think the projects in London really showed to us in RAP and to Resource London just how hard it is for people to manage their waste in general, to manage their recycling either in the home, where do you put it in your flat, how do you transport it down to the bins, where are the bins located, what's the bin store like, probably dark, damp and pretty smelly. Do you know why you should be recycling? So do you understand the benefits of it? So will you actually go to the lengths that might be required of you to go and recycle? So any questions on the context there for me or from anyone?
John, yes, please.
Thanks, Councillor Mackenzie Boyle. Yeah.
Hi, a couple of things. Peabody Buildings and Clerkenwell, I know it, I was raised near there. So it is jammed, it is pretty much jammed. So when you get all the waste, all the recycling, is there a danger that the cardboard, etc., is put outside and it gets wet? And if it gets wet, therefore it can't be recycled? So we may be losing something in that. And number two, I did forget to mention that I'm on the board of Royal Berks Fire and Rescue. What has your risk been have they got higher, shall we say, in probability of fire with recycling and cardboard and wood, etc.? Sorry to have put two huge things on you there.
Okay, so not specific to food waste, but I'll quickly answer them for you. Yes, if you don't put cardboard in a bin, it will get wet. And yes, lots of people get huge online deliveries and the boxes are enormous and it's a bit of an effort to squash it down so it doesn't get put in the bin.
Yeah, sorry, let me just get in there. Some people will put stuff in the wrong stuff. They will see a cardboard box and dump their food waste in there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's difficult because you can't control what anyone does, whether they live in a house or a flat. The main issue that our research showed is that people feel very disconnected from their waste and recycling if it's presented communally. So you might remember the young woman with the blonde hair and the dungarees. She was an absolute passionate environmentalist and was very disheartened by she would try to recycle as best she could, and then someone would just mess it all up by putting a load of stuff in the bin that shouldn't have been there. To recap on your question about fire, absolutely, particularly as this was a London-based project that happened after Grenfell, totally top of our agenda. But you think, whether you're presenting the waste as just cardboard or whether you're presenting it with cardboard mixed with food waste, mixed with nappies or whatever, it's still a fire hazard. So it's about managing that as best you can and using metal bins, things like that. But let's focus on the food waste.
It was sort of on the cusp of food waste. So thanks for being patient on that.
No, not at all. Absolutely delighted. You'll have to stop me because I'll probably go on too long. Okay, any other questions?
Mary, please.
Yeah, can I just say that I completely reiterate the bit that some people just dump it in whatever bin they come to first. And that messes up the recycling bins completely. And that is so frustrating for all the people who are really taking this seriously and really trying to do something. So how that is stopped is a real important issue for me. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully I'll pick that up when we're talking about contamination of food waste as well.
Okay, I can't see any others, Julia, so if you want to crack on.
Okay, so next slide, please. So in terms of the types of food waste collections from flats, noticed early on in your evidence pack that you talked about bulk bins, but I just thought it's useful to talk about some other options that you might want to think about as you're on the early stages of this. So bulk bins, we could almost describe that as like a bring bank collection, like you might find in, Tesco's or Sainsbury's car parks. You take your stuff to a large bin and you put it in. So that's what we mean by bring bank. So you provide the residents with the small kitchen caddies like you'll have had for your recent food waste rollout. We'll talk about caddies a bit more in a minute. And then people are encouraged to regularly transfer their food waste into these larger containers. But you could also think about a door-to-door collection scheme, but of course that comes at a cost. So they get a small kitchen caddy and then a larger one, similar to the ones you've probably all got outside your properties now. And then, so everybody would have their own caddy outside their front door. Or you could use caddies in a communal area. That might be interesting where you've got limited space to provide a wheel bin. So just some things to think about. Next slide, please. So here are some photos of caddies. You may have looked at lots of caddies before when you were thinking about your curbside. Colour, I know you've got some silver. Silver is really popular because lots of us have silvery coloured household appliances. I would say really think about size, and probably 5 litres would be big enough for a flat because you have fewer people in the household. You don't want to put too much in there because it will probably be sitting on the counter or under the sink for longer and get a little bit smelly. So I really wouldn't go any larger than 5 litres. And that's top right hand image with the grey caddy and the milk bottle for scale is sort of in my house, and that is a 5 litre caddy, just to give you an idea of size. The blue caddy is one that we considered using for City of London, and it has had a bracket so that you could pop it on the kitchen door under your sink if you wanted to tuck it away. And that bottom left-hand one is produced by Addis. So just things to think about if you want to enable your residents to tuck these things out of the way. I would say maybe don't go for the same size caddy as you've rolled out for curbside, but in terms of procurement, you might get a better deal. Next slide, please. So food waste liners. These are hugely beneficial for encouraging people to take part in food waste collections and to maintain their participation. It really helps with keeping the caddy clean. If you're thinking about people who live in flats, how do you get the food waste from the kitchen to the bin? So you might want to take your food waste down to the communal bins on your way to work or college or school. And if you've got the caddy with you, then what do you do with it? So it's best to just take the liner. We really like people to take regular trips to the bin so that the bags don't split, because it's pretty revolting when they do. It's happened to me several times. And you might want to think about procuring slightly stronger liners, so a thicker material. You can get different gauges for flats so that there's even less likelihood of them splitting. Of course, when you buy more stuff, it costs more money, but it's just something that you can consider as you get further down the line with your decision making. Next slide, please. So all our work at WRAP on liners has been focused on how to get people properly participating in food waste recycling. As I mentioned, providing liners is absolutely integral to that. You might want to think about not only providing an initial roll, you could just provide a very small roll to keep your costs down, but then supply people regularly. And because it's going to be difficult for you to know who's participating in the scheme, because people aren't necessarily setting out a container, if they're using a communal bin, you won't know who's taking part in the scheme. So something that we used for Resource London for the dry recycling to get around this issue of transporting materials from a flat down to the bulk bins was we provided these single-use sacks using that dispenser that you can see in the bottom image, a bit like the kind of thing that you would have seen in the supermarket fruit and veg aisle in the past when we used, those very flimsy bags. They're sort of dying out now because it's a single-use plastic. But you've got to make it really easy and obvious for people. And then it's also got to be cool. It's got to become part of people's normal everyday life, which is something we call social norming. And I'll talk a little bit more about social norming in a moment. Next slide, please. And here are your outside options. So all these options are the ones that I think you were interested in, which is these bulk bins, these communal bins. I mentioned that I would talk to you about apertures or flaps or chutes. So hopefully you'll see from the images that there's a handle, and it basically, sort of the handle is smaller than the lid of the bin so that you can't stuff a big black sack of waste in there. It's got a little flap such that you don't have to look at what the last person put inside, the last night's dinner. So basically, sort of this kind of action. And bin housing is a useful thing to consider. That obviously adds to your costs. It just improves the aesthetics. You can put signage on it. It reduces vandalism. But you can buy a normal wheel bin with a lockable lid to reduce your contamination issue and have a chute put into that. So some options there. Next slide, please. So I wanted to use the chat function again And I wanted to ask you, from an option of 3 things, what you felt the key drivers are for Bracknell Forest to roll out food waste recycling to flats. And is it to do with costs? Is it to do with environmental issues and sustainability? Or is it to provide an equitable service to residents? So costs, environment, or sort of an equality issue. And if you could pop that in the chat, that would be great. Thank you. We've got 2. Any more for any more? There's a theme here. I'll wait for one more. See if anyone's got a different thought. Okay, thank you all so much. So that's sort of an absolute endorsement for environmental issues. So I'll have a think about what I say in the next few slides as to how we can sort of tease that out a little bit more. Okay, next slide, please. And next slide, please. So there's a really key relationship in collecting food waste, as I'm sure you went through when you went to your 3 weekly collections, a really key relationship between residual waste and the success or otherwise of a food waste collection scheme. To have a really good functioning food waste collection scheme, whether it be for curbside properties or for flats, you need to have great communications. They've got to be absolutely impeccable for flats because of the difficulties that I outlined at the top of the presentation. You might want to think about your frequency of collections, so really reducing that down even for your flats. And it might be that you have some of your flats collections on fortnightly and some of them on weekly if you've got slightly more problematic estates. You could consider the capacity or the number of your residual containers to really drive people's habits to doing the right thing with their waste, whether it be food or dry recycling. If you're collecting residual waste too often, or it's just too easy to dump stuff in the residual bin, there's no incentive to recycle. But you've got to weigh that up against the issue of having too infrequent or inadequate capacity, and then you get more contamination, whether it be in your dry stream or your food waste scheme. You've got really to locate all your containers together as best you can, which is really difficult on some estates, and every site is different. You will need to spend a lot of time and effort deciding where you're going to put containers, what size containers, and whether you'll have to take them away in order to provide a food waste container. Next slide, please. So talking about site surveys, that's a different estate that I worked on. That one was in Hackney. Much more modern estate with bin stores. Basically, when we assessed each site, we looked at how many flats were on the estate, how many bins there were, what types of bins they were, where they were located around the site, what was the signage like, was the whole property behind a gate, and did you need a key for those? Were the bin stores behind a key code access or something like that? And what opportunities were there to improve signage, have more signage, more bins, and to have a look at things like the condition of the bins. Some of them are really quite battered and old and, with probably 20 years old or more. Was there adequate lighting? What evidence was there of vermin, which was a particular problem on some of the sites? Litter, that kind of thing. So really, you're not going to entice people to take part in food waste recycling if you've got a really grotty bin store where they don't want to be hanging around, let alone lifting the lid to dispose of their food waste. So it's something to consider in the round. Next slide, please. So when I was asking about what your key drivers were, this was so I could sort of think how to put some of these other questions to you. So when you're operating a waste collection service, you want it to be efficient. But also you've got to think about quality. So you might have better quality control if you had a separate vehicle servicing your flats in Bracknell. Because if you've got high levels of contamination, you could potentially put some extra pickers or sorting in a plant where you're taking the food waste to make sure that the contamination isn't getting into the main processing units. But to make it efficient, you might want to put the flats food waste recycling onto your existing curbside rounds, particularly once they've bedded in, because I know the service is still very new for you. And you need to think about how much food waste will you get. All our statistics at WRAP show that on average, you'd get about a third of the amount of food waste per week from a flat than you would do from a curbside property. And I know it's probably quite hard to envisage, but it's about 0.6 of a kilo of food waste per flat per week, and 1.5 kilos from a curbside property. So this again comes back to my question about the key drivers. To implement an effective flats food waste recycling service isn't going to be cheap and may not actually bring you high yields of food waste, because to do a site survey is resource intensive. You may need to do more than one site survey per site. And there's the additional signage, the additional communications, the infrastructure providing caddies and liners, and the infrastructure of the outside bins. And that needs to be weighed up against your costs of treating residual waste. So, Councillor Porter, does your waste still go to landfill or does it go to energy from waste?
A bit of both, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Dorothy Hayes might be able to
I'm
pick up
actually here. Councillor Hayes here. We're
Hi,
actually
Councillor
taking it. I'm very strong on that. We do not landfill. You can appreciate, and we are taking it to an anaerobic digester.
Brilliant. Okay.
Okay, and that's how I want to fit it in as well with regards to flats. And I'm very impressed with what you're saying at the moment, young lady. Thank you.
I haven't been called young lady for a very long time.
When it comes to us lots, you're a young lady, okay?
My point being is that it's a lot of resources to have a food waste flats program. And you may not get that many environmental benefits because it's so hard to capture a significant quantity. So I don't have the numbers for you, but it's something that potentially down the line, if you're interested, we might be able to look at it for you in a bit more detail. Okay, so next slide, please. So next slide again. So I'm going to talk about problems and solutions now. I feel like I've only really talked about problems all night, but hopefully this will be a bit more positive. So we know that food waste recycling is associated with people just going yuck. And also people really don't think that they produce food waste. So, they might feed it to the dog or a cat or teenagers. But a lot of people just don't want to get involved in it. And if you think about how you will have until quite recently filled up your bin, you might get you put your potato peelings in, and then you put some crisp packets in, and then you might have some, a lettuce bag, and then a banana skin, and it sort of almost builds up in layers. So you don't see the food waste. So if you have a separate container for your food waste, a lot of people find that really quite off-putting, but it's all about keeping things clean and hygienic. And so all the messaging that we've done is about cleanliness and simplicity. And we've moved on with one of the leaflets that I've shown you from Oxford City, which says, line your caddy with a cornstarch liner or newspaper and fill it with food waste. I would say don't fill it, because it's more likely your bag will split. We talked about free liners, but obviously that's got to be cost effective for you. You don't want to provide liners to people that don't participate. You need to think about minimum touch points for people using a bin. So maybe you'd want to think about a foot operated, a pedal operated lid lifter, and think about employing staff to clean communal bins, just to keep things pleasant for people to use. Next slide, please. I said I'd mentioned social norming. So we know that food waste recycling flats has low numbers of participation. And one way to drive up participation is through social norming. So you'll remember a year ago, every Thursday night at 8 o'clock, pretty much the whole nation was going outside on the street to clap and bang pots and pans to thank the NHS. And that's an absolutely brilliant example of something becoming normal, as that everyone in society, or most people in society, were taking part in. And so really we need to work towards food waste recycling as being totally normal. Why wouldn't you be doing it? With flats, you have higher levels of transients, people moving house every couple of years, or even more often than that. And so you need to keep your communications really regular, much more so than curbside. Next slide, please. We know that where you don't have high participation in food waste collections, crews might just start doing their own thing and maybe not collecting every week, or even indeed every fortnight. I had this problem on a couple of sites I worked on in London. And then the bins get really smelly, really revolting. And so you need some good quality, supportive and regular supervision of crews that pick up your food waste from flats. You need to make sure they've got keys and the access codes that I talked about before. And use your caretakers. So where there are caretakers in any of the flats, it's pivotal to talk to them and involve them. They can really be great champions for you, and good liaison points between your residents and your crews, and indeed landlords. Next slide, please. So I can see that you're all really, really keen and desperate to get your food waste schemes in, but don't be too ambitious. So food waste is really heavy. You don't need massive bins. If you have massive bins, it's going to be really difficult for the crews to move them potentially. I love this image. So I think it's in Edinburgh, and someone was really keen to recycle their food waste or pizza dough from a restaurant, and then it got slightly out of hand, a bit like a magic porridge pot. You could potentially make sure that you've scaled things to the right level by rolling out a scheme quite gradually, starting with the low-hanging fruit, working on estates where people you think are going to be much more likely to engage, and seeing what works there. And if you're going to roll it out piece by piece, maybe set up a postcode finder so that people that live in other blocks of flats but have heard about it and are keen to know, you can check if your block's got food waste collections yet. And that's obviously more important down the line because people have moved house potentially. Okay, next slide, please. So we talked about contamination. And I mentioned that chutes and apertures can really help with that. The communications, the red image at the top is something that the City of Westminster has produced for their Flats food waste project that they've recently rolled out. And then the green one is what you put in. I talked about caretakers. Yeah, absolutely. Talk to them about it. I've mentioned signage. Something I haven't talked about yet is that you could ask your crews to issue the tags on the bins where they're contaminated. Then you probably have to get your residual crews to pick up a contaminated bin, but at least it would be a way of getting the message back to your residents. Then you need to work with your landlords and potentially ask them to send letters to the residents, or that's something that you might want to pick up from Bracknell. Okay, next slide, please. Right, what does success look like? So I've just put together on the next slide, please, just some bullet points that I'll let you have a read through. Pretty much all the stuff that I've been talking about in the last of however long, 40 minutes or so. Thinking if there's anything in there that was sort of new. Not really, other than just, this communication or regular communication. So in Salford, they communicated at Christmas, just to use that as a point in time where we're always thinking about food as a good way of communicating. And also Salford had an opt-out approach and asked people if they wanted to take part, and only 2 people opted out. But then you'll see that they probably had 10% of people not taking up the opportunity of even collecting the caddies that were delivered to their doorsteps. So there we go. I think that is the end of my presentation. I can see that Councillor Mackenzie Ball has popped a question in there, so I'll read that out now. Quick question, I don't know who's just even.
Yeah, literally. Because I told a couple of my residents who were really happy about this was going on, but didn't, I don't know, want to come on tonight. Just said, well, I just sort of copied it from my other account. Well, if I run out of bags, can I just use a co-op bag to line my bin? And I'm sure Dot will have apoplexy.
You can use your bread, and I'm sure that Julia will. Your bread. Know when the bag that your bread is in. No, the bag. Yes, you can use. That's why I'm hoping you'll attend on Wednesday before council. The waste that I'm doing with the girls.
Yeah. With all due respect, can I quickly go back to my resident now and say yes, you can. No, you can't.
I would say unless I see the bag first, I don't want to put in a bloody plastic. But yes, she could, because the machinery we're using is ripping it. It rips it up and takes it with it. And I'm sure Julia will tell you this is the same thing. But
okay.
Yeah.
So if you're going to an anaerobic digestion plant, they have depackaging units at the front end that strip it out.
That's right.
When you went to your food waste scheme for curbside, were you given liners?
Yes, they've been given the fine liners.
And were they polyethylene or were they cornstarch? Are they super stretchy?
No, they're the cornstarch.
So they are cornstarch. Okay. Yes. Co-op tend to now provide cornstarch.
Yes, that's
at their tills.
I've been talking to supermarkets.
But did you also say that you'll accept bread bags?
No, not bread bags. No.
Okay, some authorities do. It's very confusing, right? You are using compostable bags, which is different from degradable.
Yes.
Cornstarch, so there's no fossil fuel element in them, basically.
Juliet, I was going to come in and ask, because I was very impressed with, may I, John, ask some certain things? Is that okay?
If you're a quick Dot, because we're nearly running out of time, we've got other people wanting to ask questions.
Educating is exactly what we need to do. The separate vehicle control for flats is something I will take part of. The cost element, I chucked in there tea bags because most people didn't realise. They say, oh, I don't have any waste, but they suddenly have said, oh, Mrs. Hayes, I had 70 bloody tea bags this weekend. And that you'd start doing it. Employing staff to clean, it's a different thing. With the apartments, and I'm sure that's why
Dot, have you actually got a question rather than comments,
yes.
please?
When you go round, is it better to talk to each individual flat, apartment or flat or whatever, to get on board what they are doing?
Do you mean if you were going to roll something out,
yes.
if it was a given? Yes. Do you know, I was involved in a study where we did door knocking to promote the food waste service that already existed in a local authority. And it had absolutely zero impact and possibly a negative impact, but it was difficult for us to decipher the results. But we measured their tonnage. The most impactful thing is to have that no food waste, please sticker. That really works. And to provide free liners. I noticed that someone had a point about potentially residents going to a supermarket and buying liners. Actually, all the research we've done is that people really resent having to do that. If you buy your own liners, they're probably 20 times more expensive than a council can provide, buy them in bulk. So people, and they're about 20-25p individual liners. So, you know, if you're getting through a couple of those a week, that's potentially quite a lot of money for some of your residents. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought now.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ian, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Julia, for that really interesting presentation. I think Chris Whitty would be very proud of you with the next slide.
I was ably assisted by Emma.
Excellent. Thanks for your candour on the return on investment. And you mentioned about the disconnection. And I'm wondering, in terms of the food recycling, I understand that can lead to energy production at the end of the process. Is there any bandwidth at all that we could offer additional incentives to residents to connect to this process?
A lot of our messaging is around the fact that the food waste can be turned into energy. So we've got some beautiful images of peeled oranges with the new style light bulbs poking out the top, lit up. And we've got lots of equivalents. So, you know, how many tea bags turns into, you know, an hour's worth of lighting a light bulb, that kind of thing. So there's certainly messaging that I'm aware of that you can use to engage with residents. Whether you would take that down the line and say, you know, whether you would want to link that to electricity supply that's, you know, green in some way, that could be kind of an innovative route to follow.
Okay, from your professional opinion, Julia, has any other authority tried that approach where, you know, residents will get a reduction in their energy tariff, for example?
I'm not aware of it, and I don't know how you would check up on it.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
I don't know how you would establish that.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Sandra, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Julia. So, you know, every house needs a good foundation. So what's your advice to us to lay down a good foundation for collecting from flats? You know, what are the things that we can, because it seemed to me listening that there are lots of good ideas out there and some might work and some might not, but what can we really rely on to help us?
I would say consider every estate or block of flats quite individually. And part of that is just logistics. So can your residents access the bins? Can your crews access where you've put new bins? And it's that balance between an incentive to cycle, wanting to recycle, doing it for all the right reasons, and also not being able to get rid of waste so easily.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Does anybody else have a question for Julia, please?
Yes, please, Chair.
Yep, okay, Tricia.
Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't find my hand.
It's on your head.
Yes. There's a large block of flats in my patch. The bins, I think, used to fit in the bin stores originally, but they certainly don't now. And there are just loads of wheelie bins strewn all over the place, and it's a terrible mess. I don't quite know how we're going to approach, well, I can't see much recycling happening there either, but as a result, it's a terrible muddle. And I think we somehow have got to get the basics right and find a way to put food waste bins in a prominent place so they're easy to get at. I mean, I don't know where we can start with that, but I wonder if it's possible we could have that presentation, your presentation, Julia, given to the landlords, really. That block of flats being a particular issue, and they're a huge landlord in Bracknell, and they don't seem interested in sorting out the current problem, let alone adding food waste to it. I wonder if there's any thoughts on that, please.
I mean, there's an absolute wealth of resources that the organisation London have out there, with cost calculators, images that you can use as templates to create signage and stickers and things like that, specifications for bins. I think really it's about you as a local authority. How heavy-handed do you want to be with your landlords that don't encourage or direct their tenants to manage their waste effectively? But it's about good provision, so it might be more about doing something very positive rather than getting heavy-handed initially. So, who would want to manage their waste properly if it's just a mess? Probably no one. So do you have to work with the landlords to say, could you consider this? What about that? And encourage them gently before you sort of take any more stronger action.
Yeah, they don't. So we've got to come up with the ideas, really. So I think they need information from people like you. That'd be excellent. But I'll try and put across things. Thank you very much.
Julia, Emma's just popped a quick question in the chat, so I don't know if you've seen that one.
There's information. Yes, Michael, I'll come to you as well.
The question from Emma was, do other councils have a specific criteria when assessing whether a flat is suitable?
I'm pretty sure on the London website, there's information on how to do a site assessment.
So just following on from that, are there councils then that just, sometimes they do certain percentage of flats and other flats they just find totally inaccessible?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when I was asking about your key drivers. And I remember one of the key drivers that I said you could select from was equality of service. And yeah, it is an issue because there will be some sites where there just isn't the physical space to put another bin. And there's always pressure on bin locations because you can make more money out of a car parking space as a landlord than you can at providing adequate space for bins. But that's not to say that you couldn't potentially put something slightly further down the road and then have that as a facility for that block of flats and maybe another one. But every site is so different. I think I mentioned we did 122 site surveys of just Peabody flats, and they were all very different.
Just one quick question from me about, you mentioned about the different strengths of liners, and you suggested that a stronger liner for flats. And you mentioned gauge value. What's the average gauge then, please?
I want to say 5 microns, but I don't know why. So basically, just think it's so when you're specifying a liner, you've got, you know, the width, the length, the depth, which is like the gusset, and then you've got, when you sort of almost certainly, I thought I might have a dog waste bag in my pocket, but I don't at the moment. But you know, when you sort of rub your fingers together to pull a plastic bag apart, that very fine layer is a couple of microns, which is a micromillimeter thick, and you can, I think some of them go up to 14, but that's probably a bit too heavy. But yeah, there'll be some nerdy person in RAP who'll know the answer to that.
I'm sure there will be. Michael Brossard, please.
Julia, thank you very much for that. I would like to put you forward for mastermind on dog poop bags and the suitability. Julia, I've got a question really with those residents in Bracknell Forest Council have a green bin, and some of them have an external contractor who actually cleans out the bin with a pressure washing facility. Now, you mentioned about the commercial food waste containers and cleaning them up, because of course we've got a problem in the summer. People talk about maggots and flies. Who actually would fund the cost of cleaning out the bins? And given I saw that they're a very small aperture, what is the mechanism then for tipping them on the side and then pressure washing them? Is that accessible, or have other councils tried that and been successful?
Okay, so let's break that down. So in terms of the costs, that would be decision whether you wanted to do that as Bracknell Forest Council or whether you require your landlords to do that. It might be that you've already set a precedent in terms of who owns the bins with your estates. So for some councils, they require the landlords to buy the residual bins, but then the recycling bins are provided free of charge, but they're still owned by the council. So if you've got a precedent on bin ownership now, you could follow that potentially. And then in terms of actually the practicalities of cleaning the bin, so there's a lock in the full size lid of the bin, so you would just be able to lift it up and squirt it out and then take the cloth and wipe the aperture. Or if you're using the bin housing, the lid isn't locked, it's just the housing, so you would just need to kind of give it a squirt and give it a wipe. Probably not something I want to do in August personally, but you know.
Yeah, thank you for that, Julia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Does anybody else have a question for Julia, please?
John,
Bob?
If I may, Julia, from experience, is there a correlation between the number of flats in a block and the size of the container that you put in?
Yes, I was having a chat with Oxford City Council this afternoon, and they are using 140 litre wheeled bins. No, sorry. Right, 180 litre wheeled bins, which is what I think is the same size as your is that the same size as your waste container on the curbside rounds? Can't remember.
I think it's 140. Oh.
Okay.
Remember.
So it's slightly smaller than your old-fashioned standard.
240.
So 240, okay. So we would suggest a smaller bin because of these problems of weight and, you know, the density of the food waste and moving it around. And they provide that between 6 flats. I would think that's actually quite generous, but it's probably a practical way to go. So when I talked about maybe, yeah.
Just to follow up, I mean, it strikes me we've already gone down a path of providing one roll of bin liners and a weekly collection on the housing. What I'm hearing here is we can't treat people in flats who are council taxpayers any differently, it seems to me, than people who are in a house. And of course, they may have the same landlord, one of the housing associations. So we collect weekly. It seems to be very difficult not to treat blocks of flats the same as we do the housing. Do you have any comment on that?
I agree. I mean, that's obviously a political decision for you to make as a council. The issue is that because you have reduced your residual frequency, you're providing a way for residents to get rid of the smelly waste very regularly. If you're living in a block of flats and you're still on a weekly cycle for residual waste to go, then you're still getting the same type of service. If it's down to a fortnightly collection, you could still say it's an adequate service because it's away from your dwelling, because it's outside of your flat, it's not on your property, it's in the communal setting. It's not something I can help you make a decision on, because that's
okay. Thanks for the comments. That's going to be the difficult one, I think. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Bob. Dot, please.
I'm sorry, my little hand thing, I'm having problems if you knew where I was at the moment. Having said that, Bob just brought up things, because we've got to look at, and this is where I'm really looking to the team, as I call them, to help me with it, because we've been very successful with the residual coming from the curbside. Julia, I don't know whether they've told you about it. We thought it would be in about 15 tonne a week. We've actually succeeded over that at 20 to 24 tonne.
Wow.
We thought it was going to be 350. We're up to the first month was 536 tonne going to energy, and I mean electricity. That's how I want to do it, is the anaerobics way forward. So I really, on my part about this is, should they be looking the team, because I'm going to be standing aside, because these are the guys that are going to be forwarding it, be looking at a design of the map, because we're not a city, we're a borough. It's entirely different. We're not council flats and that. We have different things. Should they be looking at something that would be like a borough design map, showing where the flats are, who they are, and what the design elements for that purpose? Because this is where I think it's segregating it and putting it into different blocks, how we can go about it. Because this way, I'm sure that the flats will be on board with us if they thought they were going to be able to. And I know John will take this forward for us. But I do think it may be working out some sort of mapping system of the area.
Definitely, in terms of when you come to look at collections rounds, yes, absolutely. And I appreciate that you as a borough, you've got affluent areas like Crowthorne and Sandhurst, where you may have flats with, very affluent members of society living there, who potentially are easier to engage in recycling activities. But it's not so much about affluence, it's about the extra effort that a flat resident has to go go potentially down several flights of stairs, outside in the rain, in the dark, to dispose of whatever material. And I think it's the actual logistics that are the difficult thing to resolve, rather than the willingness to take part, that might be more linked to socioeconomics.
Thank you, Julia. Mary, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. It's when I've been on Facebook page since these food bins were food wasters started to collect, and there's a big outcry from lots of, I know you can't say for everybody, but there was a big outcry. When are the flats going to start? Why aren't they doing us? When are the HMOs? Why aren't we doing us? And so I think there might be a good sell here if we could get them. I think though we would have to work with the housing associations and the people, and on the Janet's part, they have management companies that actually deal with the storage of all these things as well. We'd have to talk to all them and get them to talk to us, because for most of the flats on my area, and I think there's over 100, they all have a communal cupboard, which is quite at the bottom of their flats. It's not very far to go. So it's not as if there's not the yellow and the green parallel lines. They haven't got to walk 3 miles to put anything. They just got to go down the steps, which many of them will do on going out during the day. Yeah. So I think for Bracknell, it is more positive than it would be if you were going miles. And I think if we have lots of communication with the people who live in these flats and with the housing associations, I'm quite positive, and mine is not an affluent area, but I'm quite positive they will come along with us, because they want to make a difference, and it's for their kids as well, with the environment, that they actually have to make a difference. And if we start, I won't lecture them, but I will try and get them on board. And I'm more positive that this can go ahead and will be a success.
Great to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else, please? Okay, I see no other hands. So, Julia, many thanks for tonight. Would it be okay if we come back to you with some other questions or?
Yeah, that's not a problem. If you want
figures, if we may,
forward them through
use your experience or access to information. If we,
absolutely,
information at a later stage.
Yeah, I think. I don't want to put off your enormous enthusiasm. I think it's quite tricky, and you've obviously had a totally brilliant and resounding success with your curbside food waste collection service, which is absolutely to be applauded, and really bold, going to 3 weekly. I mean, that's amazing. I think with flats, there's definitely some potential. It's just keeping your ambition sensible.
Yeah. I don't think any of us think it's going to be an easy task, but it's a task we need to try and our best at making it successful.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's why we've got you, John, chairing it.
Now that's why we've got the panel, Dot. We've got a fantastic here.
And we have a great team. That's why I am very proud of you all. I really am. And Julia, I'm going to go off as well, because I don't want to interfere. This is them putting it together to help me. And I really do appreciate you coming tonight, and John allowing me to come this evening. Okay.
Hopefully Dot the check's in the post.
Yeah. Love you all.
Julia, I put a little note up to say thank you very much, and my little finger went funny and it said Julia instead of Julia.
Oh,
thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for all the really great questions and making me think. And thank you for suggesting. I can't remember whether it was Bob. Bob, did you suggest I should go on Mastermind to talk about?
Oh yes.
That's Councillor Brossard. Michael Brossard.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael.
My recommendation. Well done.
That's my life's ambition achieved now.
Well done. Richly deserved. Well done, Julia.
Can I just say,
brilliant.
John, I don't want to spoil your or rain in your parade. I'm sure you're going to thank Emma hugely for all the effort she's put in order to get Julia here, because I know it's been a lot of, we've all got to spin a lot of plates and lots of diaries. So thank you, Emma, and thank you, Julia. That's absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
My sentiments exactly. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Julia. Tonight, it's much appreciated. This is our learning curve, and you are the first expert we've called upon. So thank you. You set the bar very high for all the others. So I thank you for that. You've given us a great insight, and we can now go forward with a much more open mind and a much better understanding of the tasks ahead. So I'd like to thank you for that. And again, thank Emma for organising Julia and discovering her. That is very well done. And we all know about wrap. So
also about co-op.
It's not just about eating a wrap; it's also about your side as well. So thank you very much.
Eating the whole wrap and not wasting it.
Of course, in half.
And if you have any extra, put them in the freezer.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thank you, Emma, for setting it up. Okay,
Julia, enjoy the rest of your night.
So, are you guys debating now and discussing some more?
We're just going to have a little quick catch up. So yeah, but
I'll leave you all now.
Enjoy the rest
have a
of your
lovely
evening.
evening. Thanks.
And hopefully you haven't missed EastEnders.
Thank you.
Thanks then. Bye.
Well done,
Thank you very much indeed. Bye, Julia. Thank you.
Thank
well
you.
done, Julia. Bye. Bye, Julia.
Bye, thank you.
Okay. Emma, would you like to stop the live stream, please?
Yeah, bear with me 1 second.